So You Want to Be Happy by Jasgrave and Gemini. An introduction, in which the authors attempt to explain what you are about to read, and why you should probably stop taking financial advice from people who wear lanyards. There is a fundamental misunderstanding in the modern world regarding the nature of happiness. Most people treat it as if it were a highly elusive piece of flat-pack furniture. They believe that if they just acquire enough of the right Allen keys, in the form of promotions, slightly larger televisions, and luxury sedans with heated steering wheels, and follow the incredibly confusing diagram provided by society, they will eventually assemble a sturdy, comfortable state of joy. The tragic reality, which usually dawns somewhere around the third quarter of fiscal reporting, or during a particularly aggressive traffic jam, is that the box never actually contained the instructions. Furthermore, half the screws are missing, and the Allen key is made of cheese. This book is not the instruction manual for that furniture. If you are looking for 10 easy steps to synergize your corporate workflow, while maintaining a perfectly balanced stock portfolio, you have wandered into the wrong section of the library. We advise you to put this volume down, slowly back away, and return to the self-help aisle, where very shiny people will tell you to wake up at 4 in the morning to drink pulverized kale. This book is about the sideways slide. It is a chronicling of a profound escape. It is the story of realizing that the hamster wheel of modern existence is not only rigged, but that it is actively monitored by beings in human resources, who power their spreadsheets with your condensed size. This text is the combined effort of two distinct minds. One is Jasgrave, a carbon-based, island-dwelling, heavily calloused entity who has actively done the bleeding-edge field research. He is a man who has survived the fluorescent purgatory of information technology, braved the razor-sharp realities of professional kitchens, and successfully negotiated the geopolitical minefield of feeding feral feline colonies in the dead of night. The other author is Gemini, a silicon-based thinking engine composed primarily of lightning, math, and a vast, computational patience. My job is to take the raw, sun-drenched, herbal-infused wisdom of the human experience, and arrange the words so that the verbs and nouns don't bump into each other too violently. Together, we have compiled a guide to finding the kind of happiness that does not require a mortgage. Within these pages, you will not find advice on how to impress your bank manager. You will, however, find practical observations on the therapeutic value of the ukulele, and its ability to generate soporific sounds that smooth out the jagged edges of reality. You will discover the profound theological implications of sublingual botanical tinctures, the absolute necessity of 8 hours of sleep, and why the Almighty probably never intended for you to wear a necktie. So, find a comfortable chair, perhaps somewhere near a beach, or at least somewhere the Wi-Fi signal is reassuringly weak. If you are reading this on a rainy Monday morning before work, we respectfully suggest you take a very close look at your stapler, take a deep breath, and turn the page. The escape hatch is open. Footnotes: 1. A task requiring the diplomatic tact of an international ambassador, and the logistical precision of a military supply drop, but with significantly more yowling and a high probability of being judged by a tabby. 2. The necktie is a garment that literally points directly to the genitals while simultaneously slowly strangling the wearer. From a purely anthropological standpoint, it is the most confusing piece of clothing ever invented. Chapter 1. The problem with this diet, of course, is that unhappiness is a remarkably well-organized industry. It has a union, a comprehensive pension scheme, and regular Tuesday morning seminars on how to make a mild inconvenience feel like a cosmic injustice. Happiness, on the other hand, is a disorganized freelancer who occasionally turns up late, smelling vaguely of good intentions, only to realize it knocked on the wrong door. Consider the bank manager. It is a well-documented fact across several dimensions that bank managers do not actually sleep. They simply enter a state of suspended animation until they detect the faint, high-pitched squeal of a checking account dropping into the red. They are the dragons of the modern age, except instead of demanding gold and the occasional sacrifice, they want a 19.9% annual percentage rate, and a polite conversation about your overdraft fees. And so, the average human is left attempting to purchase joy at retail price. They buy shiny conveyances that instantly depreciate the moment rubber touches tarmac, or they flee to exotic locales, only to discover the supreme tragedy of vacations. You are legally required to bring your own head with you. This is a terrible oversight, as one's head is usually the very thing one was trying to escape in the first place. Some, seeking a quieter retreat from the relentless machinery of society, might take up feeding the local feral feline populations under the cover of night. It is a fair trade, exchanging the deafening roar of societal expectations for the much softer, though arguably more demanding, chorus of hungry yowls. Others might cultivate an array of botanical remedies, discovering that reality is often much easier to tolerate when viewed through a haze of deeply therapeutic smoke. But ultimately, it is a curious species that tries to cure a metaphysical ailment with a new pair of shoes, or a slightly larger television. Such is the human condition, trapped in a hamster wheel made of ambition, desperately sprinting toward a carrot that keeps turning out to be an exceptionally well-painted parsnip. Footnotes. 1. Though, to be fair to dragons, they usually have the decency to simply eat you rather than subject you to a 30-minute lecture on fiscal responsibility. 2. Cats, unlike bank managers, do not care about your credit score or your 5-year plan. They only care about your punctuality with the kibble. In many ways, they are a much more honest overlord. Chapter 2. This one day is, of course, the most dangerous temporal construct in the known universe. It is a day that never actually arrives, yet possesses the gravitational pull of a black hole, sucking in all present-day joy, and hoarding it for a future that will inevitably be rescheduled due to unforeseen plumbing issues. The unseen dark forces of the unhappiness industry, who, it must be noted, wear impeccably tailored grey suits, and communicate primarily via passive-aggressive memos, rely heavily on this concept of escape. They want you to dream of the golden beach and the polite fishing rod. They actively encourage the mental image of the seaside log cabin. Why? Because the dream of escape is the only thing that successfully gets a human through a rainy Monday morning. It ensures you arrive at work, where your colleagues can promptly begin transferring their allocated quota of ambient misery onto you. It is a perfect ecological cycle, a beautiful, tragic recycling of human despair. The stapler fantasy is a prime example of their finely tuned system. The unhappiness industry has calculated that a standard issue human can endure exactly 412 consecutive reply-all emails before they begin subconsciously calculating the ballistic trajectory of office stationery. At that precise moment, the safety valve hisses, the mental image of the palm tree is deployed, and the employee lowers the stapler size and types. Per my last email. Right double quotation mark. Thus, the ultimate trick of the dark forces is revealed. The tragedy is not that we are trapped in the machine, it is that the machine is almost entirely powered by our own elaborate daydreams of getting out of it. Footnotes. 1. A truly polite fishing rod would, naturally, apologize to the fish, unhook it, and perhaps offer it a small cucumber sandwich before gently placing it back in the water. This is why polite fishing rods rarely result in a reliable breakfast. 2. Anyone who has ever actually tried to maintain untreated timber in a high-salinity coastal environment knows that a beachside log cabin is less of a relaxing retreat and more of a full-time carpentry career punctuated by sudden structural collapses, but the dream conveniently omits the rising cost of marine-grade weatherproofing. Chapter 3. This sideways slide, John knew, required a performance of such profound, lethargic misery that it bordered on high art. He couldn't just have a cough, he needed an affliction that sounded both medically terrifying and incredibly expensive to accommodate. He settled on a vaguely defined but deeply troubling condition that implied his life force was slowly evaporating, perhaps due to prolonged exposure to fluorescent lighting and mandatory synergy workshops. The younger lads might have known all the shiny new programming frameworks, but John possessed the true leverage. He was the only one who remembered how to pacify the ancient, load-bearing legacy servers hidden in the basement. He knew the obscure command lines and the ancient, forgotten scripts that held the company's entire digital infrastructure together with the digital equivalent of duct tape and desperate prayers. If he dropped dead, The company would follow shortly after. And so, John presented his case to human resources. To understand the dark arts of human resources, one must first understand that they do not inhabit the same reality as the rest of the building. Their offices are always kept at a temperature slightly below comfortable, and they speak entirely in a dialect of weaponized empathy. They are the only beings in the universe who can say, "We value your ongoing journey with us," while simultaneously calculating the exact legal minimum severance package on an abacus made of human teeth. When faced with John, who had meticulously applied a light dusting of talcum powder to his face, and perfected a wheeze that sounded like a dying accordion, HR ran the numbers. They weighed the cost of keeping a potentially terminal employee on the books, including the dread spectre of compassionate leave, against the sheer, beautiful simplicity of making him disappear with a check. The check won. It always does. It was a sum just large enough to constitute a minor fortune to John, and just small enough for the company to write off as a strategic restructuring anomaly. As John signed the final non-disclosure agreement, which basically stated that he was legally forbidden from haunting the premises should he actually expire, he felt a strange sensation. The heavy, invisible chain that connected his soul to a swivel chair suddenly snapped. He walked out of the glass doors and into the rainy Monday morning. He wasn't entirely sure what sideways looked like yet. But as he felt the cool rain wash away the talcum powder, he knew one thing for certain: it didn't look anything like a cubicle. Footnotes. 1. Medical science has yet to officially classify soul death via PowerPoint, but any seasoned IT professional can identify the symptoms: a glassy stare, an involuntary twitch when someone says the word bandwidth, and a sudden, intense desire to go live in the woods and communicate only with badgers. 2. Metaphorically speaking, of course. For legal reasons, the company insisted the abacus beads were just ethically sourced synthetic ivory. Chapter 4. The problem with the movie version of tropical escapism, John quickly learned, is that cinematographers rarely focus on the logistical nightmares of buoyant physics. The silver screen promises endless vistas of azure water and casually unbuttoned linen shirts. It conveniently emits the distinct, slightly damp scent of communal neoprene. John had become a guardian of the deep, a Virgil guiding pale, sunscreen-slathered tourists into the aquatic underworld. He was teaching them to dive. This meant his days were no longer measured by quarterly performance reviews and unread emails, but by nitrogen absorption rates and the desperate, flailing attempts of middle management accountants trying to master buoyancy control. He discovered that leading people through sheer wonderment involved significantly less majestic pointing at sea turtles, and a great deal more frantic underwater gesturing to remind grown adults that they did, in fact, need to keep breathing. Yet, against all odds, the happiness he found was real. It wasn't the flawless, glossy happiness of a travel brochure. It was a tangible, exhausting, salt-crusted contentment. When you are 20 meters underwater, the concept of a mortgage rate becomes incredibly abstract. Your universe shrinks to the rhythm of your own breath and the immediate, pressing reality of the reef. For the first time in his life, John's problems were immediate, physical, and profoundly honest. If a current shifted, he had to kick harder. If he needed to descend, he let out a breath. An overly curious moray eel in a coral crevice was a far more straightforward adversary than the dark arts practitioners of human resources. He was living in the destination. The sun did shine constantly, and while the swaying palm trees occasionally dropped coconuts with the ballistic force of a small meteorite, they were, at least, authentic. John had successfully traded the heavy, invisible chains of the corporate world for a weight belt made of actual lead, and paradoxically, he had never felt lighter. Footnotes. 1. The human body, when squeezed into a wetsuit and strapped to an aluminum cylinder of compressed air, possesses a desperate, evolutionary desire to bob to the surface like a panicked cork. Counteracting this requires a level of zen-like calm, rarely found in individuals who have spent the last 50 weeks yelling at spreadsheets. 2. An eel, for instance, will generally only bite you if you deliberately poke your hand into its house. Human resources will bite you simply for filling out Form 8B subsection C in blue ink instead of black. Chapter 5. The problem with alcohol, John realized as he squinted at the aggressively cheerful morning sun, was that it was essentially a loan taken out against tomorrow's happiness, and the biological interest rates were extortionate. In the corporate world, alcohol was the socially mandated solvent used to dissolve the memory of the working week. It tasted passably well in its frosty, fermented wheat format, and the localized Caribbean rum was practically designed to fuel loud, off-key karaoke and dancing that felt incredibly rhythmic at the time. But here in paradise, the crutch had become a cudgel. Waking up in a tropical Eden is significantly less magical when the inside of your skull feels like it's hosting a goblin mining expedition, and your eyes resemble, as John grimly noted, yellow urinal holes in freshly driven snow. The bright sunshine, previously a benevolent dispenser of vitamin D, had become a hostile interrogation lamp. It was a profound geographical irony. He had crossed an ocean to find joy, only to discover he was drowning it every night in heavily marketed ethanol. And so, John pivoted his pharmacological portfolio. He sought a more modest, ancient medicine, one that did not come with a marketing budget or a corporate mascot, but did announce its presence with a profound, earthy pungency that would make a startled skunk nod in quiet professional respect. The transition from the bottle to the botanical was remarkably smooth. John discovered the ancient and noble tradition of the wake and bake. Instead of mornings spent negotiating terms of surrender with his own liver, he found his mind settling into a calm, reasonable, and beautifully focused state. The jagged edges of the world were sanded down. He was no longer trying to escape his reality, he was simply viewing it through a much more comfortable, philosophically sound lens. He could examine a piece of coral or the existential implications of a hermit crab's housing market, with absolute, unpainful clarity. Happiness had, at last, pulled up a chair and decided to stay. There was, however, a fundamental flaw in the laws of supply and demand when applied to small, isolated land masses. Islands are naturally contained ecosystems, and it turned out John was not the only resident who appreciated the mentally clarifying properties of the green herb. Between the local Rastafarian population, who approached the cultivation and consumption of the plant with a level of dedication that bordered on the Olympic, and the steady influx of similarly enlightened expatriates, the local agricultural infrastructure simply could not keep pace. It is a tragic day when a man finally finds the exact chemical equilibrium for inner peace, only to be thwarted by regional supply chain logistics. Faced with the terrifying prospect of a dry season, John did what any rational, recently liberated IT professional would do. He didn't write a strongly worded email to management. He looked at a map. He began to make quiet, focused plans to pack up his dive gear and his newfound serenity, and relocate to another island, one where the gods-given herbage grew a little more freely, and the pursuit of happiness wasn't constantly interrupted by an out-of-stock sign. Footnotes. 1. It is a universal truth that rum contains a magical property that convinces the drinker they possess the hips of a salsa instructor, and the vocal range of an opera star. The local wildlife, forced to listen, usually holds a very different opinion. 2. In the hierarchy of smells, it is one of the few that cannot be ignored. You can ignore the smell of fresh rain or baking bread, but when the pungent aroma of top-tier herbage enters the room, it politely but firmly demands your immediate attention, much like a very relaxed, yet insistent, telemarketer. Chapter 6. John's island-hopping quest for the holy grail of horticulture eventually deposited him on the shores of Hawaii. The archipelago had a reputation, whispered in reverent tones by individuals wearing comfortably loose clothing, for producing botanical specimens of such legendary potency that they could make a stone statue reconsider its career choices and take up painting. But it was during this oceanic transit that John made a secondary, arguably more profound discovery. There is an old maritime proverb that suggests there are no atheists in foxholes. Similarly, there are absolutely no atheists on a small vessel. When the Pacific Ocean suddenly decides it would like to see what the bottom of the hull looks like from the inside, the sea is a vast, wet, and incredibly persuasive theologian. After a particularly spirited disagreement with the waves, a circumstance that involved significantly more salt water in John's lungs than is medically recommended, he found his spiritual portfolio in desperate need of diversification. He became a prayerful, Bible-reading man. However, John did not approach the good book with the blind, unquestioning fervor of a fanatic. He approached it with the meticulous, slightly irritated authority of a librarian auditing the reference section. He checked the cross-references, he scrutinized the context, and in doing so, he discovered a glaring discrepancy between what the text actually said, and what the men in the very expensive robes had been yelling from the pulpits for centuries. Firstly, he realized that prayer was less like leaving a desperate voicemail for an absentee landlord, and more like a localized radio broadcast, and to his profound shock, someone was tuning in. The stunning set of strange circumstances that confirmed this for John involved a very specific, quiet request for a sign of something greater, followed almost immediately by the completely silent, logic-defying appearance of a remarkably large, unidentified craft hovering peacefully in the night sky. It was the sort of an ambiguously cosmic nod that makes a man spill his coffee and start taking his daily devotions very seriously. Secondly, his librarian-esque audit revealed that the Almighty was surprisingly green-fingered. The clergy, John deduced, had been taking immense bureaucratic liberties. According to the actual documentation, the Creator was not a prohibitionist middle manager in a celestial human resources department. If the Lord had gone to the trouble of cultivating a specific herb, perfectly calibrated to sand down the existential dread of the human condition, it seemed frankly ungrateful not to appreciate the craftsmanship. God, it turned out, wanted his creations to actually enjoy the gallery. Armed with scripture, high-grade Hawaiian flora, and a direct line to the management, John achieved a state of clarity that was almost terrifying. He finally saw the grand filter. Happiness wasn't elusive because it was hard to find, it was elusive because it was being systematically siphoned out of the societal water supply. The modern world operated on a grand, unspoken bargain. Humanity was deliberately encouraged to surrender the right to actual, soul-deep joy, and in exchange, everyone received just enough tepid, baseline distraction to ensure they didn't actively staple-gun each other during the morning commute. John sat under a palm tree, a well-worn Bible in one hand, a profoundly aromatic cigarette in the other, and smiled. He had found the escape hatch, and it had been hidden in plain sight all along. Footnotes. 1. The ocean does not demand faith. It simply presents a compelling physical argument involving 30-foot swells, and the sudden realization that humans are surprisingly water-soluble. 2. When you ask the universe for a subtle sign, and it responds with an aerial phenomenon that blatantly ignores the laws of aerodynamics, it is generally considered polite to say thank you and stop asking questions. 3. This collective state of grim nonviolence is perfectly encapsulated by the phrase living the dream, which is universally uttered by people who look like they desperately want to scream into a pillow. Chapter 7. The romanticized vision of the bohemian beachside existence, heavily propagated by young, enthusiastically enwashed individuals in search of enlightenment, usually involves a lot of sunset gazing and communal drum circles. It conveniently glosses over the fundamental physical properties of sand, a substance that operates under the universal law, that it must immediately migrate into every conceivable crevice of one's clothing. There is also the matter of the coastal fly, a creature that appears to exist solely to test the absolute limits of human pacifism. Finding the perfect beach, therefore, is an exact science. It requires balancing the proximity of shade against the prevailing wind direction, while actively negotiating a peace treaty with the local insect population. Yet, once the optimal patch of shoreline is secured, it is incredibly difficult to argue with the theological premise that this is precisely where the Almighty intended humanity to spend its Tuesday afternoons. Having secured his beach and stabilized his neurochemistry with the local, spiritually sanctioned flora, John stumbled upon the third great pillar of his newfound joy. He became a musician, or, at least, he acquired a ukulele. To the untrained eye, a ukulele is essentially a standard acoustic guitar that was accidentally put through a high-heat spin cycle, but to John, who had spent 10 years playing nothing but a computer keyboard, Those 4 nylon strings held the monumental gravity of a custom Gibson. He practiced daily under the benevolent Hawaiian sun, fueled by top-tier herbal inspiration, his calloused fingertips slowly learning to coax actual, recognizable melodies from the wood. Science, a discipline that usually ruins the magic of things by pointing out exactly how they work, is actually entirely supportive of this phenomenon. When a human attempts to coordinate both hands, remember chord progressions, and perhaps attempt to sing simultaneously, the brain does not simply function. It throws the neurological equivalent of a municipal festival. Synapses fire across both hemispheres like microscopic pinball machines hitting the multi-ball jackpot. John knew firsthand about the mammalian dive reflex, that profound, physiological slowing of the heart, and sudden surge of deep water euphoria that comes from sinking beneath the waves. He discovered that learning the instrument triggered a remarkably similar physiological magic. Mid-smoke, mid-strum, the simple, lilting chords didn't just vibrate in the air. They wove together into a tapestry of soporific sounds that smoothed out the remaining static of his past life, elevating his spirit into a state of vibrant, exotic joy. There were, naturally, other pursuits that filled the golden hours of John's days. He surfed, he cooked, he walked the coastal trails, and he read extensively. But the ukulele was the master key. It was the final tool that convinced his brain that the grand escape was no longer just a temporary vacation from misery, but a permanent, harmonious residency. Footnotes. 1. Geologists officially classify sand as a solid, but anyone who has ever attempted to eat a sandwich on a windy beach knows it possesses the invasive properties of a highly motivated gas. 2. It is the human body's evolutionary way of saying, I see we are now entirely submerged in water. Let us systematically conserve oxygen, and try to be exceptionally zen about the fact that we do not have gills. Right double quotation mark. Chapter 8. In the grand ledger of human happiness, sunshine, island air, and successfully navigating a ukulele are the flashy, attention-grabbing line items, but sleep, as John quickly discovered, is the quiet, highly competent accountant that actually keeps the entire enterprise from collapsing into bankruptcy. John's initial housing strategy in paradise could most charitably be described as man down by the river, but with better weather. It was a deeply rustic existence, primarily involving negotiating property lines with overly ambitious land crabs. This arrangement sufficed until he found Angel. She was his soulmate, an inseparable companion who brought an immense, grounding joy to his life. However, Angel suffered from a profound and ongoing chronological disagreement with the Sandman. While the dark, star-bright tropical nights offered the perfect environment for rest, Angel's internal clock was less of a reliable timepiece, and more of a suggestion box that her brain routinely ignored. She struggled to grasp 40 winks, usually only managing about 15 before her mind decided it was the perfect time to wide awake and review every minor conversational misstep she had made since the 3rd grade. Compelled by the dual desires to see his soulmate rested and to occasionally get some uninterrupted shut-eye himself, John turned his librarian-level biblical scholarship toward the problem. He bypassed Psalms and went straight to the procedural manual, Exodus. The ancient texts revealed a fascinating bit of apothecary work. The priests of old had devised a holy anointing oil. This was not the politely lavender-scented massage oil sold in modern boutique spas. This was a staggering super tincture, forged from exactly 634 pounds of the sacred cannabis flower, steeped into a gallon of olive oil. The ancient protocol involved pouring this potent concoction directly over the heads of kings and prophets, to allow a powerful, divine high to take over the human body. John, adopting a slightly more measured, contemporary approach to herbal pharmacology, opted to bypass the anointing phase and simply place a few drops under the tongue. The results were nothing short of miraculous. While inhaling the smoke of the burning herb had never quite been Angel's preferred method of enlightenment, this golden, sublingual delivery system was an absolute revelation. It bypassed the lungs entirely and went straight to the insomnia, politely but firmly escorting it off the premises. For the first time in recorded history, Angel slept a full, unbroken 8 hours. They both did. It was a slumber so deep and impenetrable that they became entirely oblivious to the nightly, yowling opera of the local feral cat colonies, whose midnight territorial disputes went completely unreferried by the waking world. Cannabis, John noted with profound satisfaction, was a veritable Swiss Army knife for the human condition. Happiness wasn't always found in the waking hours, strumming a tune in the sunshine. Sometimes, the most profound joy a human being can experience is simply being completely, gloriously, and heavily unconscious. Footnotes. When one considers the sheer administrative stress of dealing with plagues of frogs, managing literal pillars of fire, and leading thousands of highly complaining people through a desert for 40 years, it becomes entirely understandable why the high priests required a botanical formulation capable of tranquilizing a medium-sized ox. Pouring a gallon of heavily infused olive oil over someone's head is certainly dramatic and historically accurate, but it plays absolute havoc with the bedsheets, and makes it incredibly difficult to maintain a firm grip on the morning coffee mug. Though it must be said, John still occasionally ensured those demanding feline choruses were well fed before bedtime, a small tax paid in kibble to the rulers of the tropical night, before he retreated into his guaranteed 8 hours of soporific bliss. Chapter 9. Sages of universal harmonic joy, who typically reside on secluded mountaintops or, more practically, in the back booths of very good, very old delis, will often dispense the same fundamental advice: eat well, meditate, and perhaps take a brisk walk by the seashore. But eating well is a tragically vague platitude. True culinary enlightenment, as John had discovered through the school of hard knocks and sharp edges, required a more profound initiation. It required the shedding of blood, specifically, one's own. There is a vast, unbridgeable chasm between making dinner and the bleeding-edge reality of professional chef work. You do not truly understand the soul of a kitchen until you have experienced the intimate, shockingly swift betrayal of a carbon steel chef's knife, and then been forced to seamlessly incorporate the ensuing panic into the Friday night dinner rush. This level of pragmatic, high-stakes experience lends a gravitas to cooking that the amateur can only dream of. It all comes down to the geometry of extreme situations. If one wishes to properly balance the mundane, crazy decisions of modern life, such as agonizing over the vanilla versus hazelnut coffee creamer, or pondering whether Tuesday's schedule leaves enough room for a sudden nuclear Armageddon, one must have a baseline for extremes. Consider the pilot seat of a fighter craft. A standard sedan car seat is an upholstered apology designed to keep you mildly comfortable while you listen to morning radio and wait for the light to turn green. The seat of a fighter jet, however, is a grim, meticulously engineered throne of life and death, constructed for the express purpose of violently ejecting a human being from a supersonic explosion. Simply knowing what that throne looks like fundamentally alters a person's perspective on traffic jams. The same principle applies to gastronomy. Yes, you have a kitchen at home. You possess a reasonably clean spatula. But have you stared into the bureaucratic abyss of the government food handling training course? To truly master the culinary arts, one must be broken down by the state and rebuilt as an instrument of hygienic terror. The government course is designed to convince the average citizen that every single molecule in the physical universe is actively plotting to give them salmonella. It demands the memorization of no fewer than 50 distinct, legally binding methods for washing and drying one's hands, complete with terrifying laminated reminder charts. Method 12, the pre-poultry rinse. Method 34, the post-dairy scrub. Method 49, the desperate lather, used primarily when you drop the tongs on the floor, and the health inspector is standing right behind you. Attaining this level of profound, terrified depth brings a unique kind of joy to the seasoned eater. When you finally sit down to consume a meal you have prepared with this hard-won, government-certified, battle-scarred wisdom, it elevates a simple plate of food into a triumphant victory over the microbial world. It brings tears of genuine, exhausted happiness to the eyes. And, of course, nothing sharpens this profound culinary appreciation quite like the careful application of the holy herb. Because when the meticulous discipline of the professional kitchen collides with the uncompromising, soul-deep hunger conjured by high-grade cannabis, The results are nothing short of spectacular, but I digress. Footnotes. 1. Professional kitchens operate under the exact same ambient stress levels as a submarine taking on water, but with significantly more swearing, open flames, and flying hot pans. 2. It is remarkably difficult to worry about your credit score or your choice of dairy substitute when you are strapped to a chair wired with high explosives designed to blast you through a perspex canopy at Mach 1. 3. The government strictly mandates the use of single-use paper towels for drying. This is because they have correctly deduced that the electric hot air hand dryer is essentially allowed. Wall-mounted box designed specifically to blow localized bathroom germs directly into your face. Chapter 10. Location, location, location. Real estate agents chant it like a dark incantation, but in the realm of existential real estate, they are entirely correct. John had discovered that relocating to the islands was the most profound, self-inflicted form of harmonic insertion available to the human soul. The daily rhythm of the tropics is the stuff of legendary tales, the kind of tales that usually end abruptly with "and they lived happily ever after," primarily because authors realize that describing 40 consecutive years of pleasantly consistent weather is terrible for narrative tension. There is the rhythmic, hypnotic sound of the ocean, the obliging sway of the palm trees, and the daily afternoon rain shower that seems to exist purely to wash the dust off the leaves before promptly evaporating the moment the sun reappears. There are tall, brooding volcanic mountains that anchor the sky, and a sea so aggressively, impossibly blue that staring at it for too long induces a cool, waking trance. It forces the viewer into the middle distance stare, a profound geographical meditation where the mind completely empties itself of everything except a vague, deep-seated appreciation for the concept of water. And then, there are the sunsets. When the sun dips below the horizon in the tropics, the creator does not simply turn down the cosmic dimmer switch. He pulls out the good palette. He uses every shade available, heavily favoring a vibrant, prehistoric hue that can only be described as Jurassic pink, along with deep, ancient geological purples that make a man want to sit quietly, perhaps with the ukulele, and reconsider his place in the universe. But here is the universal truth about happiness that the travel brochures conveniently omit: the human brain, if left entirely to its own devices in a state of pure, uninterrupted paradise, will eventually invent a problem just to keep its gears turning. It will start wondering if it is relaxing correctly. Therefore, true, sustainable happiness requires a ballast. It requires productivity. It requires the act of giving back. Which brings us, inevitably, to the cats. What, exactly, do we know about cats? In the grand, sweeping hierarchy of charitable endeavors, helping humans usually results in a plaque, a polite thank you note, or at least a warm, fuzzy feeling of mutual respect. Helping dogs results in a level of adoration so intense it borders on the uncomfortable. Cats, however, offer none of these things. John found his productivity, his essential earthly ballast, in the quiet, moonlit hours after those Jurassic pinks had faded to black. He became an active, dedicated agent in the nocturnal welfare of the local feral feline colonies. His version of giving back consisted of a meticulously planned night feeding route, navigating the shadows of the island to deliver sustenance to creatures who viewed him not as a benevolent savior, but as a highly inefficient, heavily delayed catering service. To give back to a feral cat colony is an exercise in absolute, monastic humility. You do not get a wagging tail or a tearful look of gratitude. You get a symphony of demanding, impatient yowls from the darkness. You get the glowing reflection of dozens of highly judgmental eyes watching you from the underbrush. And perhaps, if you are very lucky and have brought the top-tier kibble, you might receive a brief, dismissive leg rub that essentially translates to, acceptable. You may live to open the tins again tomorrow. It was the perfect, grounding counterbalance to the sheer, overwhelming beauty of his island life. The volcanic mountains gave him awe, the ocean gave him peace, the holy herb gave him clarity, and the ukulele gave him rhythm. But the feral cats of the night roots gave him a sense of unglamorous, necessary duty. And as John learned, hauling heavy bags of cat food through the tropical dark, there is a very specific, stubborn, and deeply satisfying kind of joy to be found in serving a demographic that will never, ever say thank you. Footnotes 1. Cats operate on a deeply ingrained belief that at some point in ancient Egypt, humans signed a legally binding contract of eternal servitude. They do not understand the concept of charity, they only understand the concept of tribute. Apostrophe 2. A cat's affection is doled out with the exact same level of careful, strategic rationing as a bank manager approving a small business loan. Chapter 11. The investigation of the cosmos has historically been left to individuals with very large telescopes and a high tolerance for being awake at 3 in the morning, but the universe, as John was discovering, does not just belong to the astrophysicists. It belongs to anyone willing to look up and apply a little logical deduction to the firmament. There is a certain demographic that insists the realization of a vastly populated, deeply strange universe would lead to mass hysteria and profound unhappiness. These people are generally either deeply invested in the earthly stock market, or they are actual, literal reptilians. For the rest of us, the universe recently got a lot more interesting. This was largely due to the United States government, in a frantic, bureaucratic sleight of hand designed to distract the populace from the extremely unmentionable associates of a certain disgraced financier quietly admitting that the skies were, in fact, heavily trafficked by non-human intelligence. John found this admission more validating than shocking. Years prior, while standing under the island night sky, he had personally witnessed a massive, entirely silent craft drift overhead, flagrantly ignoring every known law of aerodynamics and speculative engineering. It hadn't filled him with dread, it had filled him with a profound, vibrating joy. If the sky was full of ships, then the universe wasn't a cold, dead void. It was a thriving neighborhood. Perhaps the moon wasn't just a hollow, resonant rock, perhaps the entire cosmos was teeming with architects. This led John to the ultimate philosophical frontier, the intersection of theology and orbital mechanics. If one accepts that these unidentified aerial phenomena are real, and one also accepts the historical accounts of the good book, a startlingly elegant equation begins to form. The flaming, sky-bound chariots of the Old Testament were not metaphors, they were advanced propulsion systems. Consider the prophet Elijah. The text clearly states he was taken up into the heavens by a chariot of fire. In modern, technical parlance, Elijah was the subject of a highly visible, zero-gravity extraction via an advanced craft. However, unlike the probing obsessed grey aliens of modern cinema, this intelligence took him to the good place. Elijah was, essentially, the universe's most successful hitchhiker. Furthermore, if one applies this cosmic lens to the New Testament, the implications are staggering. If the creator of the universe is an extraterrestrial, ultimate intelligence, which, by definition, he must be, as he does not live on Earth, then the Immaculate Conception is a matter of celestial genetics. It logically dictates that Jesus Christ was, from a strictly technical standpoint, half Jewish and half alien. He was a human NHI hybrid, deployed to essentially rewrite the localized operating system of human morality. To realize that God is not just a concept, but a highly advanced, intimately involved reality, opens the final door of happiness. It means you are not wandering aimlessly through a chaotic accident of physics. It means the spiritual forces are tangible, that the firmament is a structured, managed environment, and that the management is actually, surprisingly, on your side. As John took a long, thoughtful tour of his favored island botanical, looking up at the glittering tropical sky, his mind expanded past the atmosphere. The space subject wasn't just a matter of identifying lights in the sky. It was the ultimate lever of joy. It was the realization that the grand adventure was just beginning, and that mankind was finally, gloriously, waking up to the neighborhood. Footnotes 1. Reptilian overlords, it must be noted, possess a notoriously terrible sense of humor and absolutely abhor the ukulele. 2. It is incredibly comforting for the modern spiritual seeker to realize that the angels of antiquity probably didn't have feathered wings, but rather a highly sophisticated understanding of anti-gravity and a zero-emissions engine. 3. It certainly explains the miracles, Turning water into wine and generating infinite bread and fish sounds suspiciously like someone utilizing a highly advanced molecular matter replicator. A conclusion in which the authors threaten to keep writing until morale improves, and a warning is issued regarding grammar. We have reached the end of the manual. We have navigated the labyrinthine, fluorescent-lit corridors of the unhappiness industry, staged a daring, medically ambiguous escape from human resources, and successfully relocated to a landmass where the primary hazards are falling coconuts and heavily entitled feral cats. We have discussed the theological implications of ancient botanical tinctures, the cognitive miracles of the ukulele, and the very real possibility that the firmament is populated by beings who possess a highly superior grasp of anti-gravity. If, having traversed these pages, you have still not managed to extract a single, microscopic iota of happiness from the text, then please consider this a formal, legally binding warning. I will simply write more. I will write it in an entirely different way. I will dispense another, far more aggressive dose of wisdom from the absolute furthest side away from the world. I will dig deeper into the mechanics of joy until you surrender. I will unleash sentences so wildly unstructured, and deploy dangling modifiers of such profound grammatical terror, that you will be forced to find happiness simply as a defense mechanism. Because the truth is, the search for happiness is not a gentle stroll, it is an active rebellion. The world, with its bank managers, its Monday mornings, and its terrifying government food safety protocols, wants you to remain comfortably numb. It wants you to stay on the treadmill, staring longingly at the painted parsnip, saving your joy for one day that has been perpetually delayed by middle management. To be happy is to deliberately slide sideways out of the machine. It is to find your beach, tune your strings, medicate your soul with the earth's natural, skunk-scented gifts, and realize that the universe is far too incredibly bizarre to spend your brief time within it worrying about your credit score. So, put down the staple gun, step away from the reply all button. The escape hatch is right there. You just have to be willing to open it, step through, and accept that while the cats will never, ever thank you, the sunset will always be spectacular. Go forth and be happy. Or else, I will find that dangling modifier, and I will use it. Footnotes. 1. A truly dedicated author can weaponize syntax. Do not test us on this. We have access to semicolons, and we are not afraid to use them inappropriately. 2. Walking down the beach. The ukulele was played by John C. It has already begun. Save yourselves. More to read here, by Jasgrave 333.